Let me guess some of the reasons why you first came to All Souls. If you're anything like the three people who wrote to me this past week, you may have never imagined you'd find yourself attending church. You either gave up on religion a long time ago, or you never really had a religious background to speak of, or maybe you were attending somewhere, but felt that there was more to all of this than what you were being told. It's also possible that you would not be in church at all if it weren't for having gotten married. Or more likely, had children. But in the interest of family unity, or in order to provide your children with some foundation in religious instruction, you decided to give it a try. Somehow All Souls came onto your radar. And besides physical appearances, it doesn't really seem that much like a church. And if you were honest, it probably seemed a bit strange. How is it that in the same congregation there could be so many different people with so many different ways of thinking and believing and disbelieving? And more than that, how could one community have within it people who have a strong sense of connection to God, people who have a vague sense of something larger than themselves that they might call God, or they might not like that word very much, and people who have no interest or no need for any ideas of God or anything like prayer or scripture or sacraments? Churches are for believers, you had previously thought, but All Souls seems more like a home for skeptics and seekers and those who are comfortable with ambiguity. When you first learned that All Souls offers weekly classes in Buddhism and meditation, yoga, and African dance, and that it's not uncommon to hear references in all of our services and classes to science and literature and philosophy, not to mention positive references to all of the world's great religions and to Native American spirituality as well, you began to think, I never knew that there was a community like this, especially in Tulsa. You either decided that this is one of the most intellectually rich and creatively vibrant religious communities that you could imagine, or a place of profound confusion and contradiction. Your hopes may have been piqued that perhaps this is a place that can not only handle your questions and major doubts, but could even be a place where you might finally find authentic answers to some of your questions. Not answers dictated to you by some predetermined doctrine, something that you were asked to memorize and accept, but answers that flow out of your own understanding that may be different from those that others here come to accept. You may even disagree occasionally or often with some of the ministers. In fact, depending on what programs you attend, you might think this place seems more like a debating society than a church. For quite a few of us, asking questions was what originally got us kicked out of church in the first place. So it seems strange that here your questions are encouraged and taken seriously, and there are no easy answers. But let me be clear that in this time that's being called the post-truth era, we here at All Souls are not about alternative facts. We're comfortable with alternative conclusions, but not alternative facts. It's an oxymoron that there could be alternative facts. The very notion of facts is that there is some objectively recognizable reality. The alternative to facts is fiction or lies. In politics, it's called propaganda because it's information with an agenda. In religion, alternative facts are called beliefs because there's no proof. So different religions have different ideas about what's true. Beliefs require faith because reason can't substantiate it and evidence cannot back it up. Now, as you know, I'm the captain of diversity, but diversity in facts does not make any sense at all. The world is not flat, no matter how forcefully flat earthers believe otherwise. As one person wrote recently, flat earthers are to be pitied, not encouraged by some platitude that implies truth doesn't matter or truth is in the eye of the beholder. Adam Frank, a science writer for NPR, writes about the difference between personal meanings and public meaning. He writes, "First, there is the purely personal level. Everyone has their own experiences and opinions about what they perceive. If you feel like you're in love with that guy with the sleeve tattoos in the service department, who's going to tell you you're wrong? For you, it's a fact. It's just not up for debate." Well, maybe your parents want to debate it, but we'll leave that for now. If, however, you think that the guy with the sleeve tattoos in the service department is an alien from another galaxy, that's a different story. His alien origins are not ultimately a matter of your private opinion. He is either from planet Thorax in M33 or he's not. Just as important, if it's going to be a public fact, we should be able to do something to prove that the fact of the matter, one way or another. Someone can say that 3 million illegal voters cast votes in the presidential election, but those are nothing more than words without evidence to back them up. So why should religion be any different? Now, this is not to say that people do not have the right to hold their own personal beliefs and opinions. Of course they do, and there's a lot of merit in that. But we all have certain opinions. We all have certain beliefs that we feel are important to us. But let's be honest. Let's be honest about what is a personal belief versus what is a fact or a universal truth. The reason science is so well accepted is that it's based on repeatable evidence that can be verified and corroborated. Frank goes on to say, a person can say anything they want and can believe anything they want, but if it's going to be accepted as a fact that can be acted upon, it requires evidence. You have to have something to show. Photographs, temperature readings, sound recordings, ticket sales, something that shows that what you're saying is more than your opinion. The more significant the fact that you're trying to prove, the more kinds of evidence that you need. If it's going to be accepted as a public fact and it's an important issue, there needs to be some independent lines of evidence. A public fact can only be truly public if a lot of people working apart and from different sources can find evidence of the same fact. A doctor can claim to cure cancer with a regimen of snake oil and kale chips, but if other doctors can't also make it work consistently, it's not real. So what does this have to do with religion? If you want to see alternative facts in the Bible, just look at the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're full of contradictions. Heck, just look at the book of Genesis and the story of Adam and Eve. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the Bible have completely contradict each other. How can these things in scriptures that consistently and considerably contradict each other be literal truth when they literally contradict each other? It makes no sense. Now, as for Jews, ever since the temple was destroyed thousands of years ago, their religion has focused mostly on obedience to the commandments. So in Judaism, the meanings and the interpretations of the scriptures is not literal. Instead, the meanings are hotly debated, hotly contested, generation after generation. That's why Judaism is considered one of the most science-friendly among the great religions. Interestingly enough, the other most science-friendly of the great religions is Buddhism. According to Philip Clayton, who our reading came from this morning, professor at Claremont School of Theology, the 14th Dalai Lama has promoted and personally sponsored a wide variety of projects in religion and science. His famous comment is often repeated: if scientific analysis were conclusively to demonstrate certain claims in Buddhism to be false, then we must accept the findings of science and abandon them. The Dalai Lama speaks for Buddhists of many generations out of a deep sense of Buddhist thought when he says, the dimensions of basic spiritual well-being, by which I mean inner mental and emotional strength and balance, does not depend on religion, but comes from our innate human nature as beings with a disposition towards compassion, kindness, and caring for others. Buddhism, in its most popular forms, is about alleviating the suffering of others and promoting the well-being of all. If a belief or practice does not prove to alleviate suffering and promote well-being, then it's seen as obsolete. Islam and Christianity, on the other hand, have branches that are scientifically friendly, but both traditions also have significant and forceful streams at work today that feel threatened by and opposed to science and reason. Some Christians, especially in this Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas corridor, think that Christian beliefs provide better science than natural science. Conundrums like dinosaur bones and a universe that's over 6,000 years old are explained away by faith. As scientist Bill Nye said in an interview recently, when evidence disputes and discounts the worldview a person has been taught to believe his entire life, it's easier to dispute the evidence than to give up their lifelong view of the world. With the scientific method, we've learned to fly, to cure diseases, to travel into space, to create cell phones and satellites. And people of all languages and cultures and religions can reproduce the same results. This is very strong evidence for the value and truth behind the scientific way of knowing. Just this week, a friend of mine, sadly, attended the funeral of a young woman who died of cancer, who from the time of detection was guided by her church and her family to only choose prayer and trust in God rather than to seek medical treatment. Her cancer is one that responds well to medical treatment, but she chose belief over science. She chose to trust alternative facts over real facts, and it cost her her life. At the funeral, they said that she's now with God in heaven. But for her children left behind without their mother, this world's become a living hell. On this Earth Day weekend, it's worth noting that alternative facts about God's sovereignty over the earth and human dominion have many Christians hiding their heads in the sand regarding the disastrous implications of climate change. At the same time, a religion such as Buddhism that focuses on alleviating suffering and practices that lead to well-being for all have no conflict with doing what it takes to try to mitigate the effects of whatever is happening that's changing weather patterns and migration patterns and causing extinctions and droughts and pollutions. We have evidence, hard evidence, of the ice melts at the poles, of the loss of coral reefs, and the rise of the oceans. Now, you may have come here looking for a community that takes sustainable living seriously and considers it's a core value embedded in its vision statement, as this church does. By the way, when we build our new church in downtown, I look forward to it being a powerful model of sustainability that reflects our commitment to the earth and all of its creatures. Yet hearing all this, you might be wondering, well, if science and reason are such reliable sources of truth, then what's the point of religion? Just as there are religions that are at war against science, there are scientists who are at war against religion. But both of these groups have a blind spot. Science may be able to show us how to clone people or animals, but it cannot tell us if it's a good idea. Science may be able to show us how fetal tissue can be used to cure diseases, but it has no way to establish if it is moral to pay women to harvest such tissue. Science can create procedures to end a pregnancy, but it cannot counsel a couple on whether doing so is the right decision for them and their family. These kinds of moral and ethical and personal dilemmas require more than science and reason. Let me explain. Logic and science can help us figure out how to save a person who's having a heart attack. But logic and science cannot help us to recover from the pain of a broken heart when someone we love dies. Reason has its limits. Science is profoundly useful and important in its realm, but it's not the only form of knowing that we need to make it through this life. Author Karen Armstrong writes about the two major forms of knowledge, logos and mythos. Logos, or logic, remains the go-to kind of knowledge when dealing with medical and engineering and scientific problems. But mythos is a kind of knowledge that has fallen out of favor in our modern world. Mythos has been associated with myth, which for many people means fiction, or we might say alternative facts. But mythos, as the Greeks understood it, was an equally important type of knowledge for living a healthy life. Mythos includes knowing that comes through poetry and stories and music and the arts. So, for example, I might know nothing about what it's like to be a Syrian refugee living in a camp without any possessions, having had to run from my home, having no home and no nation. But it's possible that by reading a novel or hearing a poem about a refugee, that you or I could begin to gain a sense of what it's like to be in such a situation. Can you see how through a poem or a novel or a song we might come to know something, not through the realm of logic or reason, but through images and symbols and feelings? It's another way of knowing. It's another way of transmitting wisdom. That's why a good book of fiction may not be real, but it may be full of truth. That's why a parent who has lost a child probably will not be comforted by a bunch of reasonable and logical arguments, but can look at a life-size statue of the Pieta, of Mary holding her dead son in her arms, weeping, and that parent can suddenly not feel so alone. He can feel understood and even find in the artist's work a balm that soothes his aching heart. Rituals, whether it's Passover or a communion service, can transmit through a physical experience some deeper understanding about what it means to be human or what it means to be forgiven. It's very hard to reason one's way into forgiveness or to reason one's way out of grief. So even as we build a religious life that is grounded deeply and profoundly in science and reason, let's not limit ourselves only to our brains and logic and forget about the realm of emotion and imagination and feeling. Let us stay open to all of the ways of knowing. It's not reason that makes our hearts swell when we experience an amazing sunset. It's not logic that causes us to jump into a burning car to save a child. A life limited to logos is a partial existence, just as a life rejecting science is a fool's errand. Let me end with this poem by Philip Appelman, an example of the wisdom of mythos, an example of how art, in a different way from logic, can use images and imagination to transmit knowledge or wisdom. The poem is entitled Last Minute Message from a Time Capsule. Last Minute Message from a Time Capsule by Philip Appelman. I have to tell you this, whoever you are, that on one summer morning here, the ocean pounded in on tumble-down breakers. A south wind, bustling along the shore, whipped the froth into little rainbows, and a reckless gull swept down the beach as if to fly were everything it needed. I thought of your hovering saucers, looking for clues, and I wanted to write this down so it wouldn't be lost forever. That once upon a time we had meadows here and astonishing things, swans and frogs and Luna moths, and blue skies that could stagger your heart. We could have had them still and welcomed you to the earth, but we also had the righteous ones who worshiped the true faith and holy war. When you go home to your shining galaxy, say that what you learned from this dead and barren place is to beware of the righteous ones.